All right. And this is one with texture. I didn't put that one up as a picture because it's just a little one that I was playing with, but this is what happens, the texture you get with the wiggle wire. Okay, all right. Okay, so we should have our cups from last week. So hopefully, you know, yours are at the right state to continue to carve. So cat hair everywhere in this house. So what we'll do is we're going to start carving out the interior. So the idea is that we're going to be thinning these walls very slowly. So the things that I find to be the most useful when doing this, or the tools that I find the most useful, are the loop tool again, but like a trim tool. So not the one that I was using last week that was more of a wire. This one has a bit more of a blade to it. So once your clay is at a harder state, you need something that's a little bit sharper to be able to remove the clay. The other tool that can be useful is just a fettling knife. So if you have one of those around, that can help you to kind of take out some of the clay. And pretty much what you're going to be doing is slowly removing like one layer at a time. So the trick with these is that because the outside is uneven, you have to be really conscious of how much clay you're taking out from the inside, because it's pretty easy to just go through. So as you're working, and I'm just going to kind of hold it, and I will start to just take out chunks of the inside. So if you see my clay right now, it's not as soft and squishy. It's still bendable, but it does break when I smush it. Okay. So I'm going to just, the same way that I did before, but I'm going to go around and just start removing the layers of clay until it's thinned out. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to work on this one, but I'm going to show you a little bit on this one. And what I'll do is I'll take the 1/2 of this and carve into it, and I'll leave the other half chunky so we can kind of compare. So I haven't tried to carve into 1/2 cup yet, but we'll see how that works. Might be a little bit easier to see. So all I'm doing is just taking my fettling knife and taking some chunks out. Kind of like peeling an apple. If you get down towards the inside, you can't reach with the fettling knife. You can of course use a loop tool. And the goal is to just go slow until and thin it out until your walls are even. Now I'm going across on this one, but I find that when I do it for these guys, it's easier to go up and down. But I think because this one's a 1/2 one, I'm just sort of peeling it here. So just like you would with a regular cup, you want to be thoughtful of this corner and how much clay you're leaving here. Okay, so I can see it on this one, but when you're doing it just on a regular cup, you're going to want to be checking and thinking about that. So for this one, and I'll stop with that for a sec, but for this one, I paid attention to the outside before I started carving the inside. So I was kind of, this is one that I took that cheese cutter to and made the outside more angular. So I'm not gonna worry about touching the outside too much. When I get down to the foot, I will, but for now, I'm just gonna let it go. So it's a little bit easier to do this when it's not a half a cup. But you just go slow. Is everybody able to work alongside with me? Yeah. Once you feel like you have a pretty good thickness or thinness, something that I like to do is, and I'm just going to mention this before you get too far, but don't thin the rim too much quite yet, because it's kind of nice to give it a little bit of a bevel. So once I am finished with the foot, I'll go back and mess a little bit more with the rim, but just try not to, just like if you were throwing, or if you're somebody who has ever taken a throwing class, when you get to the rim, you want to lift off your pressure so that you're not thinning it too much. So it's a similar concept here. You don't want to thin this rim too much right off the bat. And then every once in a while, use your fingers to go and feel around your piece and see what's thick and what's thin. And then you can go back and dig out what you need to. I have a bucket that I keep, well, like a bowl from the dollar store here, where I keep all of my trimmings when I'm working so that they dry out, and then I'll put them in a big bucket to rehydrate. So if you see me dumping this out randomly, that's where it's going. If I get the little bits collected in there, I'm just gonna kind of dump them. If you're adding a foot, be careful not to go too far down into the base, because you don't want to go through the bottom. And if you have left yourself some room to carve a foot, remember last time some of you were having trouble with it being too soft. So if you left yourself some extra clay at the base, be careful not to take too much of it away at first. So I'm going to go back in and check and see how thin these are getting, because I know, like right here, I have an indent, so the exterior goes in a little bit further, so I have to be careful because it's getting thin right there. It's thinner than the rest of it, so I have to be kind of conscious that I don't go through right there. But then over here, where it bulges out a little bit, it's thicker, so I want to come back in and remove some of that clay there.
Question is, we're thinning it out. If we didn't, for a particular cup, like texture the outside, but we want to, is it sort of too late at this stage thinking of the final thickness, or should we do that before we keep emptying out the inside?
So if you have a cup that you wanted to play with, so I left this one just sort of smooth on the outside. So if you wanted to play with the texture, I would do that now before you get too thin. I would probably do that. Yeah, I would do that now. So that you make sure, because once you start widening and taking all of this clay away, you're not leaving yourself much room to do anything out here. So I would definitely do that now. And, you know, you have lots of options for that too. So, you know, if you wanted to, you could take, you know, your fettling knife and carve through, and that gives a little bit of a different look. Let's see. I haven't had best of luck with this, but if you have that kind of cheese grater tool, you can play with it. So this one is the stiff metal, this like cheese grater, like literally the cheese slicer. I think at this stage, if your clay is hard, on the hard end, is better than this. I feel like this wire is gonna break whenever if it's too hard of clay. So I would recommend not using the soft wired one, but if you wanted to try like a vegetable peeler or something, this would be a good time to try it. And you can see really there is a difference in the texture that you get from this tool right now as opposed to when I did it when it was wet. So it's sort of like the same kind of faceting, but with this one, the clay was wet. So this one getting much more of like a smooth, crisp edge. So I recommend playing around and seeing what kind of tools you enjoy using. I have a serrated rib here. You might want to just add some texture that way. If you have a, try and keep my studio as clean as possible here, but if you have one of these rasps, this is, you know, you can always carve away using that. And that'll leave its own type of texture.
If you go through at this leather hard stage, like I just did,
yeah,
you throw it away, or can you actually add and put in plastic?
So, I think.
Be honest.
So, I mean, my honest answer is that hopefully you made like 4 of them, so you can just move on.
Right.
You know.
I have made 4 of them, so.
You what?
I did make 4 of them.
Okay. So I usually find that with clay, it's, you know, if you go through it, just chalk it up to it's a good experience, and now you know to be more careful the next time and pay attention. Usually with clay, it's not worth it, especially something like this. It's not worth it to try and, you know, rescue it
right
to that degree. You know, if you wanted to, you could try adding a little bit of clay in there, and then I would just, you know, I would wrap it up and let it all dry super slow until it's all the same consistency again.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. So then once I've used the rasp, if you want to, you can then go back in again and maybe smooth out some of those marks. Get kind of a chattering there, depending on how I hold the fettling knife. So you can see as I kind of sliced down, it gave me those little marks. So that was just from the angle that I was holding the tool, which was about to like this. Let's see. So see if I have any other little carving tools around here. You could probably get into carving some different patterns if you wanted to too. It's like a little dental tool. So, you know, you can certainly continue to play around with the outside if you want to, and then head on back to the interior. Alrighty, so if you notice, I'm getting just about like that thick of a piece at a time. So you don't want to go too much too quickly, because that's when you'll end up gouging through. So remember to just take it slow and just, you know, be scraping off a little bit at a time. I'll show you on here again. This one dried out a little bit more since it was cut in half. At this point too, you're going to be smoothing out the interior, so it's going to have a nicer interior surface. So like last week when we were doing it, when you were carving out the inside, it was kind of chunky. So now that it's set up, it's a little bit smoother.
Shauna, I'm using this mud tool.
Yeah.
It's such a joy for this process.
Yeah.
It just
Goes right
of course,
through.
can you see it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a Japanese kind of a tool, actually. But having said that, I'll probably go through the edge. But right now, it's just going really smoothly.
Really nice.
I recommend it.
Can someone put that in the comments what that tool is?
Say what? It's a
Yeah. Jan, why don't you post that to the Padley link when I
Okay.
put it up? It's a Cheryl. It's a Cheryl mud tool, trimming loop, and it's about $30 on Amazon. But we could post
Isn't that
something.
ouch.
Yeah,
Worth it.
that was my dad's Father's Day gift 2 years ago.
So you know what it costs. Yeah, it's great for trimming for wheel. It's a great tool.
I've never treated myself to anything more than just the these guys, just the loops. But I have had students who had those that like them. All right, in a second, I'm going to show you my progress from this versus the one that was the other half. So we can start to see how we're getting thinner here. So it's slow, it's a little bit at a time, but the weight, oops, sorry. The weight is much different. If you start to feel like your interior is getting to a good thickness, and you're ready to think about the rim, would you just raise your hand so I know where everybody is at? So if you feel like your inside is getting, okay, so I've got 2. All right, so.
What's our goal thickness?
I mean, I would say that, well, I mean, that's kind of I think it depends on your piece, but you know, it's about what you would throw. So, you know, as you're going, the thinner you get, the lighter it will be. So, let's see. Not sure how, these got fairly thin, so bad with those kind of measurements. Maybe trying to peek at my slab roller, see what, maybe like 1/4 of an inch. Does that seem about right? As you go, you'll start to feel the weight difference as you're taking it out. And like I said, occasionally go through and squeeze it so I can see, like right here is definitely thicker than in here because I've been kind of leaving that rim alone. So when we feel like we're getting closer to the rim, how many of you are working towards a foot? All right, so I'm going to address the foot first just because we're going to turn it over, and I don't want you to thin your rim out too much before we have to rest it on there. So I'm going to do it on this one. So if you had started your foot before, then this is just going to be a matter of refining. So as you go around, you might not have a whole lot of work to do. This one is not too bad, but it still needs a little bit more carving, I'd say. So I'm going to just start with the outside, just like I did before, and just get that basic shape down. Your foot should really speak to, you know, the same language as the rest of your cup. So if you have a cup that's really smooth, then I would say go for a smoother foot. But if the body of your piece is chunky, then, you know, certainly you can keep it chunkier. So I'm just going to go through here and add a little bit of a undercut. I actually kind of like this swirl right here. And if I can't get my hand in there, it doesn't feel like my foot or my base is too thick. So I'm gonna leave that, like most of that right there, and just clean up around the edges. So whenever you're thinking about a foot, remember that as chunky as it's gonna be, it's still gonna have to sit on somebody's table. And whenever these sharp edges get fired, they're going to become sharper. And you don't want them to be slicing up your nice tabletop. So when you're thinking about your foot, I usually will bevel this corner a little bit. And in any regard, no matter what style I'm working in. but that I find tends to just kind of give a little bit of softness there. It also helps to take out a little bit of that weight.
What do you mean double?
Bevel, so I am cutting the corner off at an angle. So instead of having this edge be sharp like this, I'm angling it in a little bit. So we're going to be doing the same thing to the rim in a minute. So let's see. If you have,
Do you only bevel the inside edge of that circle or the outside as well?
I'll do the outside as well. So we'll whiteboard down here because my daughter's been doing school work with me while I'm working. She sits up at the table. So if my edge is sharp like that, to give it a bevel, I would just cut off that corner. So that's what I mean by a bevel. So if you could imagine if this was the inside of the foot, like that. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So yeah, I'll go through and I'll do it to the outside as well. And just not a ton, just like shaving that little edge off.
Shauna, the inside of mine is super rough right now. Is that expected, or do you have any hints for making it smoother?
Can you hold it up to the screen? Whoop, oh, that's weird. It doesn't look super rough to me. What tool are you using? Okay, it might be just that your tool is smaller, and as you're taking out the area, so I usually, like if you have something that's rounder, you won't quite get those like gougey marks. It's it'll take it off a little bit softer, if that makes sense.
Thanks. I got to get a round one. I don't have a round one, but I'll
Do you have a fettling knife?
I do. I do have a fettling knife.
What you can do is just go in and start kind of scraping, and that should help you to smooth it out. Yeah.
Thank you. I will try that.
Yeah, sure. All right.
So what do you think about like ribbing it, like using a metal rib on the inside? That would work?
Yeah, that would work too. I think a fettling knife might be easier to get in there, but a rib would do the same thing. Or even like a spoon, or if you have like a butter knife, that would probably work just as well. So anything you can find there. All right, so I'm gonna look at my foot, and it's always important to kind of get down on level with your piece and just see how it sits on the tabletop, and just see if that's the right profile that you're looking for. So I'm gonna actually take this up a little bit. So right now I was just looking at this angle. So when I put it down on the table, I was just looking at this angle, and I wanted to be able to see this base a little bit more. So I'm just going to take this corner up a little bit. And I still have a lot of weight at the bottom of this, so it should be good. All right. It's kind of fun. Put a little hip there. I'm just going to clean up this part a little bit more.
The spoon is great.
The spoon works? Awesome. Man, I was expecting it to storm today and it really hasn't. I might have to water my garden tonight.
The same. I didn't water the plants. I was like, oh, it's coming.
Yeah.
It stormed down here. You missed it.
Oh, really?
Big time.
We're supposed to get it for the next 9 days, I think. That's what they said. It's going to be miserable for all of us who are stuck in the house. All right. So I've got that angled up a little bit more. Okay. So this guy is still pretty heavy, so I'm gonna go back in now that I did the foot and this part. I'm gonna go back in and start to thin out the walls a little bit more. So, and I'll show you real quick. If you are ready to think about the rim, if you have thinned out enough, something that you can start to do is to bevel that rim. And sometimes I'll just take a fettling knife, or you can use your loop tools that you've been using, and you're just trying to take out that angle of the rim. So when you're drinking from something, it's nice if the part where your mouth goes is, you know, as thinner and angled in a little bit more for the way that your mouth works. So all I'm going to do, and I can show you on this one, is I'm just going to take my fettling knife. Hopefully this doesn't crack in half because it's only a half of a cup here. And I'm just taking out that piece of rim there. So that's one of the reasons I was telling you not to take too much off of that rim quite yet. It gives you a little bit of space to play. All right, you start to see, I'll show you again the difference so you can see how thin we're getting there. All right, I'm getting pretty close to this half one being ready to go. So if you are getting, if you have like a lot of chunky parts inside, then, you know, just taking a tool and just kind of gently scraping will help smooth out some of that. So you're not trying to take a whole lot, but just kind of anything that's sticking up will help you to smooth that down a bit. Now, when you're finished with these, you're still going to need to dry them slowly to prevent any kind of cracking or anything. So I recommend covering them loosely in plastic so you don't have to cover them quite as much as you did last time to keep them the right consistency for carving. But you are going to want to cover them with just like a sheet of plastic and let it sit even for probably like a week or so.
How should we have covered them last time? I think I just covered it with a sheet of plastic. Is there something else that I should have done with that?
So we did it with a sheet of plastic, but the last time, because we were trying to keep the air out, let me get my plastic. So for last time, if you were trying to keep this covered to be this consistency, if you got it to the point where you're going to carve but you just couldn't get to it, then I would take the plastic, and I have some little holes in mine, so I would probably end up doubling it over and putting it over top of the board and then tucking it in so that there's no air getting in there. Okay, when you're ready, when you want it to dry, you don't have to go through all of that. I think it's still probably a good idea to dry them upside down, just so that the interior kind of dries a little bit slower. And then I would just take my plastic and just cover it like that. I wouldn't worry about tucking it all in. I would just go like this. And I'd leave it there for a few days, and I might come back, and if it seems like it's still pretty wet, I might just kind of loosen it up a little bit more and just let it kind of dry on its own. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I had made a couple of extra on Saturday evening, and I left everything upside down to dry, and I noticed I've got it on little pieces of MDF, and it looks like there's a little fine green mold. Am I doing something wrong? Does that just happen?
That happens with clay, and especially with clay and humidity. As far as I understand it, it's not anything dangerous. I mean, we get mold in the clay bags all the time. Whenever you open them, you see those little bits of mold, and it won't hurt the piece at all. You can just, and I usually, if I get any on my boards, I just wipe them away. And if it's real gross, I might use a little bit of bleach spray on there, but for the most part, it's fine. It'll fire out in the kiln, and it won't have any effect on your actual piece. So don't feel like you're going to have mold in your cup.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Shauna, can you explain why it's important to dry these more slowly than, say, a wheel thrown piece?
So
or is it?
I mean, I dry everything slow because it helps with cracking, or to prevent from cracking. I think with these, because you're asking a lot of the clay, for one thing, because you're doing a whole lot of carving and handling, and you're putting some stress on it. The other thing is that you're not going to get these perfectly even. So you're going to have some spots that are going to be a little bit thinner than others. So just to kind of prevent any kind of cracking, you want it to dry as slowly as possible.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I know when you work on the wheel, and I do this in my class too, you throw it under a fan table or whatever and try and like dry it as quickly as possible so you can get to the trimming part and get it all done in one day. Hand building is a little bit different in that aspect, where I might throw some of my components under the fan to dry, but once it's built, I really do let it dry super slow. Whenever you're joining pieces, especially, you want it to dry slow.
So I'm still working on week 1 because my clay is still really wet.
Okay.
I just trying to make some more stuff and it's still really wet, but should I like cover it overnight with like holy plastic to let it?
So were you able to carve the rough piece like this?
So I tried one of those last week and then I just tried to, I was gonna say edit it. I tried to, it became mush.
Okay.
So I'm redoing it now.
Yeah.
I re-wedged it and I'm doing it. I have like 3 things here. Nothing's working because it's just really soft.
Okay.
So I can't even get to what you're doing tonight because it's soft, which is fine. I'll watch the video and work on it. But I'm like leaving my bag open to try to dry out some of this clay because I can't even make a foot like a wet, like last week's foot.
So what I might try doing is I wouldn't take the whole bag of clay and leave it out, but maybe just like take a chunk of clay that you want to be your piece and just kind of shape it, pound it into a solid block of approximately what you want your cup to look like. Even if it's wet, you can probably, if you wanted to, get some of these carvings going on the outside and just don't worry about getting to the inside. Leave it out, don't cover it with anything, and then check on it again tomorrow and see.
But carve out the inside, right?
So if your clay is so wet that you're not able to even do that part, I would just leave it out until if it's just
I'm trying and it's like
yeah. So I would just do the outside part.
Okay.
Leave it out uncovered.
I mean, that's even really soft. So that's what happened. I was trying to do that one that you have.
Yeah.
Like with this, just maybe this is too thick. Maybe that's why. I don't know. It's getting like. I don't even know where. I can't even see myself. I don't know what screen I'm in. I'm a mess right now, but.
I can see you. So if you're having trouble, so your tool is just like this tool. So if your clay is a little bit stiffer, I think it'll be just fine. Right, so I would just leave out, try to just pound your clay into a shape that you kind of want, because you don't need your entire bag. Yep, perfect. And then I would just leave. Yep, that looks great.
Yeah, I
then just leave it out
because it's like mush.
That's okay. So the only reason that you're trying to get that hole in the middle is to get some more airflow in there, so that you leave it out for the night and then come back to it tomorrow and see if it feels a little bit stiffer. If it's still too soft, leave it out for a little bit longer.
Okay.
And then once it gets to a point that it's holding its shape and you're not making fingerprints on the outside, then start carving it. You can always just leave it out and then come back to it and do a little bit more carving as you go.
All right, I'll just make some wedges.
Yeah, just like smush it up and make some shapes to play with.
Okay.
Can you say a bit about like how to get the bottom a little bit more even, what tool you use? And like I'm kind of been working on the sides, but I'm not sure about the bottom. It still looks like a mess.
So usually to get to the bottom, what I will do is take my tool, my loop tool, and I just hold it as like a fist and go all the way down to the bottom. And I just try and take a little bit off as I turn. And then I usually end up getting, you know, just like a little bit of clay, and then go back and do it again.
Do you do that kind of from the inside out or the outside in?
I go from the outside in. And then I might use this side to get the corner a little bit. And then I'm just going to keep on checking. So every time I take a little bit out, I go back in and check. So where is it chunkier? Where can I take some more weight out?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a second question. I did some of these that were like the half circles.
Yeah.
I wondered about your tips given the different shape about how you work with this differently or if you use different tools or not.
I don't use any different tools. I would just use the same thing, and I would pretty much treat it the same way. You might need to hold it a little bit differently since it is like a bowl, but and this is small enough that I can probably just use my hand. And I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna start to thin it. And, you know, again, if you want to do anything with the exterior, you want to do that first. So, you know, if I wanted to make this be a little bit more angular, might take off some of those sides first.
If I'm not getting the same kind of size chunks off, is it like inadvisable to spray it at this stage to make like that like edge moisture, or does that matter?
What do you mean you're not getting the same size chunks?
Like it kind of crumbles a little bit more easily when I'm cutting it. Like I can't peel like the same size pieces, it will crumble first.
Yeah. So I don't know if I would recommend spraying it, because what you're going to end up doing is just, you're going to hydrate just the surface of it. So when you carve into it, you're still going to be getting those chunks, you know what I mean? It'll still be kind of dry on the inside. So I would say you can either just sort of embrace it and see the different textures that you're getting, or if your piece has gotten too dry, what you can try to do is saturate like some paper towels or some newspaper and just wrap the piece completely in the wet paper, and then wrap that in plastic and let it sit for a day. And if you come back to it, it should have rehydrated a bit.
Thank you.
I'd say the only caution with that is that sometimes when you try to rehydrate your clay, you're more prone to cracking.
Sorry, I have a lot of questions, but that corner where you said to be careful, is that supposed to be a bit thicker, or you just mean to be careful to not make it thinner?
Which on the rim?
No, the bottom edge, like kind of what's hanging over the foot.
Not sure I understand where you're talking about.
Like the inside of this portion.
So like from the inside to the foot, so like this, so
like where the wall meets the yes, where the wall meets the base, like the corner.
This right here?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So the reason I was saying with that is that that's just where a lot of people tend to get weight. Like there's the only reason I'm saying is that you want to pay attention to that spot. is so that you don't have like a real thick area right there, which is going to make your piece a lot heavier than it needs to be.
Okay, I think that's what's happening with mine. It's like much heavier than it feels like it should be. So it's probably just thickness down there.
Yeah, it might be that you need to take some more out down there. So, I mean, I can pretty much feel, you know, that where that this is even.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So if you decide to like keep on making these between classes, then you certainly don't have to wait a week between carving them. And we kind of did that so that we could, you know, take our time and really explain. You don't want too much information at once. But if you're doing these on your own and you want to, you know, do another carving, you can probably come back to it the next day and continue on. You don't have to cover it and leave it for the week. So always just be pinching those walls to see where your thin spots and thick spots are. If you feel like you're getting on the thin side, but you still want to take some away, just make sure you're not taking a whole lot at a time. So just, you know, lightly scrape it. Don't try to gouge it like you've been doing. So getting a little bit thin in here. I had good intentions of keeping my carving scraps to my bowl, but I did not succeed at that at all. Now all over my table. So, I mean, really the nice thing I think about this technique is that, you know, you're constantly kind of trying to read the clay and see what shape is forming, what's coming out of the block. So, you know, make sure you're taking the time to step back once in a while and look at your piece from another angle. So if you've been sitting here looking at the top of it or the inside of it, you know, try and just take a step back and kind of look down on it and see, is it sitting properly? Is the rim, does that have like a nice wave or shape to it? Do you want it to be smoother or thinner, or Does it need to be lifted up a little bit more? Does the foot seem like it's right? So just, you know, make sure you take time to kind of think about what you're carving here. Since you can't really add on to it, you have to be kind of intentional with your shavings. So as I'm finishing up this little bowl, feeling it's a little bit thick right there, but it's almost there. It's totally fine to take a damp sponge and smooth over your rim, or if you wanted to smooth out any spots on the inside. I wouldn't introduce too much water. But if you want a damp, you know, just like a damp sponge to run around the edge. So like this rim is actually quite sharp right now because it did get thin. I beveled it and it is thin in some areas. So what I'll end up doing is taking a sponge and just kind of compressing those edges a little bit more. Something to remember when you have clay with a grog to it, and I always try and tell my students this in class, but you know, we all have the tendency to want to take a sponge and like smooth everything out. If your clay has grog in it and you do that like on the bottom of the foot, you know, the last thing you do is to take a sponge and like sponge it off. What you're actually doing is removing the finer particles of clay that you have there and exposing the big chunky bits of clay. And you may not see that until it comes out of the kiln. So just be aware that if you're trying to compress something like that, especially if you're a thrower, you're better off using one of those red ribs, something like this, to compress, rather than to try and sponge it away. But that being said, I'm going to take a damp sponge and just get rid of any little crumbs and cracks on this rim. And this is just one of those Cheryl mud tool ribs or sponges. The red mud tool. It used to be blue. Now it's not. And then I might just go over that with the rib just to make sure it's compressed. I'm trying not to lose too much of the carved nature of that rim either. Like I want it to be a little bit uneven, but I do want to make sure it's not too sharp. Once you put glaze on these, any sharp areas become even that much more sharper. So you can just kind of see the rim there. All right, so I'm gonna see if I can. So last week, we also set aside a little chunk of clay if you wanted to try to carve a handle. So I'm gonna see if I can carve a handle out of this. I feel like it got a little bit extra hard, but we'll see what I can do. So I'm just going to start by, I don't know what, I don't really have a piece this is going to go on, but we'll pretend. Pretend if it's going on that one. So I'm just going to think about the shape that where I want the handle to go. If you want, you can kind of just give a rough sketch right on the clay, just thinking about what size it'll be. So I just did kind of like a little rough drawing, just so I have a guide for where I'm going to start carving. And then I'm just going to start to take away those areas. This is not too much different than carving the actual cup. So I'm just starting to take off the bigger areas, and then I'll come back and refine it. So just starting out like a super rough handle. And then I'm going to go in and take just a little bit at a time. And especially with the handle, you want to take a little bit at a time, and I'm going to kind of support it in my hand as I go. Don't cut yourself, but you have to be kind of careful that you don't want it to break in half, because this is going to be a fragile area. So taking it slow, leaving it bigger than you think you want it. Just while I have a minute, I'm going to just cut off those edges for where it would attach to the cup. Okay. So you need to have some sort of a flat area for attaching, and this will get smaller as I go, but so that I make sure that I don't miss that part. So if I'm looking at this particular cup as I'm carving, I'm looking at how angular the cup is, and just like the foot should speak the same language as your body, you want your handle to speak the same language as well, so everything seems like it fits together. And I always say these things, but like for the sake of art, there's definitely artists who break those rules, and that's awesome. And usually you get really great stuff when you can kind of break those rules successfully. But for the sake of argument here, I'll just tell you what I think the rules are. You can decide if you want to break them or not. If you're going to be carving a handle, I did not do this, but it's a good idea to, just like if you were making handles in any other class, make more than you think you need, especially with like the chunks. So just if you're planning on making some handles, have a few chunks around, because the likelihood of accidentally snapping this is, pretty high for me anyway. So I'm also trying to leave the spots that I think will be the weakest a little bit thicker right now, so that I don't have to try and carve around thin spots.
If our block got too hard for the fettling knife to go through, should we just kind of scrap that?
Yeah, I would just get another one. If you leave it out for like a night, it'll be fine tomorrow to use. Yeah, probably because we were throughout a week. I think it probably got a little bit too hard. I actually, when I did mine, I stuck my my clay chunk inside one of my cups to keep it a little bit not as dry, or so it wouldn't dry out quite as quickly. So if you do have to leave it for a few days, that might be a good trick. And I would have mentioned that, but I didn't think of it until after we were out of class.
Thank you.
Yeah. This technique always makes me want to try wood carving. I'm sure it wouldn't be nearly as easy as this, or, you know, should carve through wood, but I feel like the concept would be the same or similar.
I have, and it is, except it's much easier to hurt yourself.
Okay. Sharper tools. Okay. So as I'm carving this, I'm going to start holding it up to the cup. And obviously it's still too chunky, but I'm going to keep carving away. I want to keep an eye on where I think it would go and how big it has to be. So I can see this is definitely too big. All right, I'm going to start to round off this top part. How's everybody doing with their carving? Do yours feel a lot lighter? Thinner? Getting there?
Getting there. Some of them are too thin.
Yeah, I've played around with this before and I've never done it at this level of dryness. Oh my gosh, what a difference.
Yeah, it is amazing the difference between like trying to do it with the wet clay and with the drier clay. All right, let's see how we're doing. Let's get in there. So I'm going to round this part a little bit because my cup is not exactly flat. So I just lost where I was going to put it. All right. All right, I'm gonna put that to the side for a minute so I can finish up with this one and then hopefully put that on here. So let's see, where are we? Almost there with this one. Just needs a little bit thinner in the base. So next week, we're going to be starting another round, but we're going to be playing with adding some textures and stuff. So we'll be a little bit more towards the beginning. So like last week, where we're going to start with some wet clay and play with adding different textures and shaping it a little bit differently from that point. And then the final week, we'll talk a little bit more about glazing and how to finish them. So I'll show you some more pots next week on a PowerPoint. Well, I think I went through right there because I wasn't paying attention. That's where the handle's gonna go now. So yeah, so I'll show you some more cups on the PowerPoint and kind of give you an idea. So we looked at some that are a little bit more traditional today, and then I'll show you some more modern takes, or like some twists, I guess. I always like to think of it.
One of the things that I'm always curious about when I see the final product is kind of like either what tools were used, or like how did someone, at what stage did someone have to do XYZ to make the shape the way it was, or to make the texture the way it was. So if it's possible, even for folks in the class, if we use the Padlet, or for the photos that we find online, like a guess or a comment about like tools or process would be awesome.
Yeah, I would. So if you have an image that you're interested in knowing about, I'm pretty good at figuring out what people have done from a picture. So if you post it on there and just say, hey, this is one that I was curious about, how do you think it was made, or like what tools do you think I could use to, you know, emulate this, then, you know, I would love for you to do that, and I'll try to comment back or see what I can find out.
Thank you.
And that would be great for next week too, because then I'll be able to share with you some things that you're interested in.
So should we have like wedged pieces ready to go, or already like carved out the middle for next week, the beginning of class?
We're gonna, if you want to, you certainly can. We're gonna focus on messing with the softer clay, to like more so than what we did here. So you don't have to have anything prepared. If you want something to be working on, you know, if you, I mean, I think you'll be able to make some as we go and play around, but if you have some started, I mean, you're welcome to just keep working on them in class. But no, you don't need anything to be prepared for next week. We can also start to look at some different shapes. So if you would like to move, you know, from making a cup, if you would rather make a bowl form, or, you know, like a box form. I'm not going to get into lids, but if you wanted to, you know, like a tray or something, we could certainly, you could do that as well. I feel like this would be a fun, like little salt and pepper form.
Shauna, do you do like washes and patinas and things like that? Is that in your wheelhouse instead of glazing?
Yeah, I have done that, and I sometimes do.
I think that might be interesting treatment of some of these, you know, kind of rougher forms.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can talk about that the last week. That would be really cool too.
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, surface design is definitely in my wheelhouse. All right, so doubled that. All right, I think this is about as thin as I'm going to get it, so. All right, this is my weak point, so this is where this is going to go. All right, so to attach this handle, what I'm going to do is pretty much the same as what I would do for any handle, assuming I can find my tool. This one. So I just use water and one of these scoring tools and just rough up the spots where I'm going to connect it. So the nice thing about this scoring tool is I tend to not use slip because it kind of just makes the slip as you score it. And then I'm going to position it where I want it, which is going to be right over top of that little hole, weak spot. And I'm just going to make sure that it kind of sticks to the point where it leaves a mark from the slip. And that's going to tell me where to scratch on the cup side. So you can just see I just have like a little, so I can see where where they're going to touch. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Normally I would do a little bit more of looking around the cup, but since there was already a little start of a hole there, I'm just going to take that spot. And then supporting from the inside, so I'm using my hand on the inside to support, and just with pinched fingers, I'm just going to press pretty hard so that there is a good join there. And then if I give it a little bit of a tug, it's not going anywhere. So that's how I know that it's been attached pretty well. So then I'm going to clean up all this little stuff. And I usually just use, this is one of my favorite tools, these rubber shaping tools, I guess they're called. I bought a whole pack of them from Amazon. I think they were being sold as painting tools, but I think I got, I don't know, I think I got about a dozen of them for like $12. So they're not so expensive. You can get really expensive ones, but these, other than the fact that the wood has started coming apart, like the paint job comes off of the wood, so that's why it's wrapped in duct tape. But other than that, they work really well. So I'm just using this to clean up that seam. And because this is a carved piece, I really want to leave as much of that kind of angularness as I can. So I'm just going to use my sponge to kind of get any of the little spots away. All right, and there would be that one. think the inside of this one could use a little bit more smoothing. I may or may not totally mess it up, but it's gonna annoy me if I don't do it. So now there's a bunch of like little bits that are stuck in there. And so all I'm gonna do is just use a dry paintbrush to just kind of dislodge them. And then they'll just come right out. So it's just like little bits from me carving into it. And as we've been here, like since the clay's been uncovered, it's gotten drier. Okay, so. I'm going to show you these one more time so you can just see where we started and then hopefully where you end up. And there's, you know, there's a big weight difference that I can feel on these two. And this one's probably even thicker than it should be because I could only get so much into the half a cup. But it kind of gives you an idea. So as you're, you know, as you're carving around, just remember, keep pinching and just feeling around and seeing what needs to have more taken out. Oh, I had this guy that I never put a foot on last time. So if you're doing this, you know, again, and you are starting with just kind of a solid block, you don't want to put the foot in beforehand. I mean, you don't have to put a foot on there at all. What I can do is just, you know, as it's sitting there, I could just bevel that edge a little bit. But if you didn't put a foot at all and you do want to put a foot, then I'll put a foot in this one. And I would do that before you start on the inside so that you don't get too thin too quickly. So I'm going to put a little foot on this one because I didn't last time. I just left it solid. So as we're wrapping up here, I'll do that. So I'm just going to carve right into it. And just start to take away. And this leaves a little bit of a different look. So, you know, depending on your clay, depending on what you like, you know, it's just another option. Could even do this with the fettling knife if I wanted, and just probably a little bit trickier. But just to start, gives a little bit different of a texture. And once I have the outside to where I want it, and I can always go and refine it, but you want to make sure that it's you know, the right shape for your piece. So I'm going to look at it from down here. I'm going to check the inside. So I'm starting to get close to the interior wall right here. So I don't want to take this angle up any further because I can feel that I'm starting to get a little bit closer there. So I'm just going to leave that. And then I'm going to start to take away from the inside. So I'm going to start in the middle and just start to turn and take away a little bit at a time. You can see where I've started in the middle and I'm working my way out a little bit. Okay, so I'm starting to get that interior removed. Stop and check. See where you are from the inside to the outside so you don't go through the bottom. If you start to feel like this is giving a little bit, then stop. You've gone too far. I find it harder to get this removed when it's this dry as opposed to when it's wet, which is why I usually start when it's wet, but this is also definitely an option. And if you do this like the next day, then it'll be easier than what I'm doing right now. Okay, I'm gonna shape that foot a little bit. I got a little bit thin on a couple parts here. So I think what I'm gonna do just for the fun of it is give a little bit of a scoop so that the foot ring is just a broken foot ring as opposed to just the circle. So just as another, you know, option or thing to think about. So I'm just gonna carve away a little bit of that foot ring. And then all that'll do is give it like a little bit of a different look when it's sitting. Okay. So I'm going to say it one more time. When you're finished with your piece, don't forget to cover it loosely in plastic and let it dry slowly. You don't want it to dry too quick. You could get some cracking. So just make sure you have it covered. Does anybody have any questions?
Do you think that I need to thin this out more? Or does that look about?
I'll be honest, it's hard to tell on screen. It looks okay to me. Does it feel super heavy?
Everything I make feels super heavy.
If the weight feels like too much, then, you know, try taking a little bit more away. You know, especially feel like down in this area. I think we end up getting a lot of weight in like this section of our pieces, because that's, you
Yeah.
don't see that part. You know, you can take away down here and you see the rim, but like right in here tends to be that problem area for most people. So just when you put your fingers in there, think about, you know, if you start at the bottom and you pinch a little bit as you move up, does it get thinner?
A little bit, yeah.
So you might be able to take a little bit more out from there.
Okay, thanks.
Did anybody get one finished tonight? It's okay if you didn't.
I did. Well, you can't really see it, can you?
Yeah, just because the light's behind you there.
No, you can't. Sorry. Bad lighting. Bad lighting. I'm starting to run out of battery, so I had to plug in, and now it's really at a weird angle.
Gotcha.
I think mine were a little too wet still.
Okay.
So I did a lot of carving out, but they're not as dry as yours.
Okay.
So tomorrow morning I have some major house renovations going on, so I can hang out down here and let everybody else go upstairs and do whatever they have to do. So I'll work on it tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Yeah, you can always come back to them if they get to a point where you're just not quite, like they're still a little bit too wet. Just leave them out and come back. If they've gotten too thin, you might want to just loosely cover them, because they will, the thinner they are, the faster they'll dry.
Yeah. No, they're covered.
Okay.
Well, thank you. This is really helpful.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
No, I think you explained things really well, and I like the demo.
Oh, thank you. It's a little funny. I feel like I'm talking to myself to some degree, but because I can't hear anybody.
Is there such a thing?
We're here.
Is there such a thing as too dry, or at this stage, like as long as it dries slowly, then the next thing is to bring it in?
Well, they won't fire it until it's completely dry. So if you know, do you mean too dry to carve, or just too dry?
Like into to fire.
Oh, no. No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, you can leave them out for a long time. As long as they're still solid, they should be fine.
And if you want to transport them leather hard to the studio, and then they can finish drying at the studio, that's fine.
Yeah. It's a little bit easier to transport when things are leather hard, just because they're not quite as fragile.
Just make sure that they're labeled, sign it, mark it in some way so that it's yours.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Don't forget we'll send out the link for the Padlet. So if anybody has any trouble, just let me know. This is my first time making one, but I've had to use them a whole bunch. So I figure if my 7-year-old can do it, I should be able to do it.
Thank you, Shauna.
You're
Yes,
welcome.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Shauna, is there a way that you can load that PowerPoint to Padlet?
I don't think I can load the PowerPoint to Padlet, because I think it's just still images.
Okay, because I know that some demos that I've seen recently have included video on Padlet.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there are other functions.
Okay.
Something happened when I gave you screen share, and it stopped our recording.
Oh,
I wound up, what I've been able to record for tonight is the entire demonstration.
okay.
But once it switched back in screen share mode, I had to start record again.
Oh,
So I'm not quite sure what I've got from tonight. I know that I've got from your demo forward,
okay.
but I may have missed that PowerPoint.
Okay. I'll see if I can figure out how to upload it.
Okay.
Michael might know more than me because he's been
Yeah,
using it for
It might be
school.
something where you can post, and if not, maybe some of the individual screenshots or images
Yeah.
posted. But
Okay.
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 Yep. Thanks again for another good night.
Yeah, of course. This was fun.
I'll see you next week.
All right. I'll see you next week. Thanks, Matt.